Thank you, Chairman, for holding this hearing today. Secretary Becerra, I'm deeply disturbed by reports that your agency, the Department of Health and Human Services, and the sub-agency Office of Refugee Resettlement has mishandled the flood of unaccompanied alien minors entering our country by, one, not properly vetting the minor, and two, by placing them in the hands of unvetted sponsors. Your agency is responsible for ensuring that the sponsors of these children will care for and support these unaccompanied children through the Unaccompanied Alien Children Program, and your agency is responsible for ensuring that these children do not become victims of trafficking or exploitation. Is that correct?
Congressman, while they're in our custody, we have an obligation to protect them, and we do. There is not a child that you can name that has been exploited or used for labor while they're in our custody.
Okay. But when you send them to a sponsor, is it not your responsibility also to ensure that the sponsors of these children will care for and support these unaccompanied children?
And Congressman, that's where I turn the question back over to you, because you Congress did not give us authority to have jurisdiction over those children once we have dispatched them to a vetted sponsor. So the answer is no, we don't have authority or jurisdiction over that child, and you have not given us any authority. So we cannot, as you know, by law, under the Constitution, I can't use a single dollar that you all give me to try to help monitor that child once they leave our care, because by Constitution, I cannot spend a dollar for something you haven't authorized me to do.
Okay. I think we have a little different viewpoint on that right there.
But Congressman, there's no dispute here. We don't have statutory authority to go beyond care for that child once they leave our custody. And we've mentioned this on many occasions. It makes it difficult for us. We do a few things voluntarily if we have the monies to do them, to try to see if we can monitor them once we release them. But those children and their sponsors are under no obligation to even respond back to us.
Okay. All right. You told Chairman Adderholt that over 300,000 UACs have been processed since the beginning of the Biden administration. Is that correct?
Yeah, I could get you a precise number later.
I would like that precise number.
We'll get that to you.
And you also said that you do voluntarily follow up on them.
We try to, yes.
You try to, okay. What percentage are you actually able to connect with?
We make a commitment. It's not a statutory obligation, but we make a commitment to try to follow up with every child that we place with at least 3 phone calls to the child and 3 phone calls to the sponsor. We say 3 because we know that oftentimes we won't get to anybody in the first call or the second call, and so we try at least 3 times with child and sponsor. We also then provide them with information on what they can do once they're in the care of a sponsor if they need follow-up services. And certainly for anyone where there is any suspicion of abuse or neglect, we try to make sure that they're aware that they can call a hotline number where we will try to make sure they get assistance.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I would like to request unanimous consent to enter into the record this article from the New York Times, February 25th, 2023, says, alone and exploited, migrant children work brutal jobs across the United States. Have you seen that article?
Congressman, my dad left the 6th grade to start working because that was what he had to do to feed the family. So I'm very aware of the fact that a lot of young children, especially migrant children, end up working to help support a family.
Without objection, that will be entered into the record.
Thank you. In this article, it says, it quotes you from 2021 saying, we don't want to continue to see a child languish in our care if there is a responsible sponsor. Okay, well, let's talk about that responsible sponsor. According to reporting from the New York Times, HHS has, quote, pared back protections that have been in place for years, including some background checks and reviews of children's files. According to the HHS Office of the Inspector General, these policies have resulted in the failure of HHS to conduct required safety checks, including even sex offender address and name checks. Secretary Becerra, has HHS rolled back any vetting requirements of sponsors for UACs?
Congressman, we have not rolled back protections that would keep a child safe. We have constantly evolved our processes to meet the needs of the kids as we have them, but we have not rolled back safety protections which would harm any child.
Okay, does HHS check to ensure that every sponsor of an unaccompanied minor child is not a registered sex offender?
We go through we go through the public registries for sex offenders.
What about the people that live with the sponsor?
We go through that, so as I mentioned before in answer to a previous question, depending on who the sponsor is, if it's the parent, for example, we go through the process to verify that this is an individual who really is a parent or a close family relative. If it is a close family relative, then we don't do the more extensive background checks. They're still extensive, but for someone who's not a family member, we'll go in and make sure people who are in the household, we check them as well, because we can't trust that if you're not the parent, you're going to be as caring for that child. So we do far more than what we do with regard to the vetting for a primary family member.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. If it's one thing I want to make sure, it's that Health and Human Services is not the last link in the chain of child trafficking.
I appreciate that. And Carson, we'd be more than willing to give you a briefing on the process that we undertake, because we have the different categories of kids: those who have an immediate family member, those who have a family member but not so immediate, those who who have identified to have someone who is a close friend of the family or a trusted name. Sometimes we get them from the family back in the home country. And then there's kids that we find no one who's close. So those various categories undergo a different type of vetting, the sponsors do, because we trust that a parent is going to care for that child far more than someone who says they're a friend.
Thank you. In follow-up to my previous questions, I want to talk about the issue of properly vetting the minor now, all right? Because not only do we need to protect the unaccompanied alien minor from exploitation, but we also need to protect American citizens from any potentially dangerous individuals who are entering the United States through the Unaccompanied Alien Children's Program. Mr. Secretary, are you aware that HHS has processed minors with criminal records into our country?
Carson, we are obligated by law to make sure that when the Department of Homeland Security has a child who is unaccompanied, who's crossed the border, that they are transferred to our care. And if there is a child who may present security issues, we take measures to provide for that. But we are obligated under law to take a minor who is unaccompanied from the Department of Homeland Security.
I get that, but do you do a background check, a criminal background check?
We work with the Department of Homeland Security to both vet that particular individual, the minor, and when it comes to the process of trying to place the minor, we also go through a vetting process for the potential sponsor.
Okay, in July 2022, Kayla Hamilton, an American, was sexually assaulted and murdered in Maryland by a 16-year-old alien, MS-3 gang member from El Salvador, who was allowed to enter the U.S. through the Unaccompanied Alien Program. This 16-year-old illegal alien was apprehended by Border Patrol in Texas on March 23, 2022, and then referred to the Office of Refugee Resettlement. According to the alien, members of his family paid $4,000 to a guide who smuggled him to the southwest border. On May 3, 2022, ORR placed the alien with a sponsor, his alleged first cousin, in Maryland. As revealed in his case file, the alien had been arrested by police in El Salvador on January 21, 2020, for illicit association with the MS-13 gang. The illegal alien's case file also includes information from law enforcement officials dated August of 22, noting that the alien had tattoos affiliated with gang activity. There was no indication in the case file that either DHS or HHS provided that noted gang-affiliated tattoos on his body at the time of his apprehension or placement into the United States. So, Secretary Becerra, that's really concerning to me. Here you have illegal alien minors with gang tattoos being brought into our country. The Judiciary Committee sent you a letter a year ago, February 27, 2023. I'm sure you've read it. And in this letter, it asked for a detailed description of and related documents regarding how HHS established and verified, if at all, the familiar relationship between the woman he identified as his aunt and the case materials referring or relating to the vetting of the sponsor, the woman he identified as his aunt. You have not responded to this letter with those questions. Can I get your commitment right now to respond to this letter to the Judiciary Committee concerning this perpetrator, this monster that killed this young lady that brutally raped and murdered her.
Congressman, I was not aware of that particular letter not having been responded to. Let me get back to you. I commit to you to work with you to make sure that we can try to respond to your request.
Well, thank you. As someone from whose community another illegal alien murdered a very young lady, a nursing student, Laken Riley, this is greatly concerning to me. And I think it's paramount that HHS vet not only the sponsor, but vet the child or vet the UAC coming into our country, especially when the person has on their body visual evidence that this is a gang member and a violent person. We cannot allow American citizens to become victims of illegal aliens.
And Congressman, once again, we can go through the process with you if you'd like a briefing on the vetting that we do of the children, along with the vetting that the Department of Homeland Security does.
Thank you, and I yield back.